Hello and welcome to this episode of Kendra's Having an Existential Crisis. Also, we're going to pretend that the background is aesthetically appeasing, even though it's not because I can't be bothered. We're going to talk about HF2309, and this is my third attempt at making this video because on the first try, the audio quality was terrible, even for me as a person who typically just uses the in-camera microphone. I'm actually using an actual, professional device, and it was not working well for me. Sound was not good. As it is, I'm sure that there's a lot more of an echo and airy sound than what I am really hoping for, but it is what it is. The second time, I just started talking myself in circles because I am feeling a lot of things about this bill. I have a lot of issues with it. So HF 2309 is a bill that was introduced in the state of Iowa that is currently going through the conversations. And a lot of it has to do with placing additional limitations on libraries. My biggest problem with this bill, really I have a bunch of problems, but I'll say the biggest concern that I have with this bill is it is addressing a non-issue. It is creating the solution to a problem that does not exist. And it is painting libraries and librarians as grooming and pedophilic when it's not. And for me, as a personally bigger issue, it is parading itself as the means of protecting children and minors while actually implementing restrictions that are going to impede more than just children. The way that components of this bill are phrased, it sounds great on paper. It sounds great in theory, and it sounds good and just. But when you actually get into the nitty-gritty of it and you actually start to think about what the meaning of some of the things that they are proposing are, and when you get into the nitty-gritty of how these elements and how these components are actually going to apply when implemented, what these things are actually going to look like, and also the language that is used, even beyond the legal scope and the legal impact, there's also this sort of social impact that's going to be at play. There's going to be additional barriers to access to information for everybody involved, even though the bill parades itself as not having that intention. There will be physical barriers, there will be social barriers. So let's talk about it. I want to start by noting that this bill is suggesting an adult section in a library, which, mind you, the existing adult section in the library tends to be the majority of any given library. But this bill is proposing that there should be physical separation of adult material. It should be marked as adult material. And there should be a means of making it physically inaccessible to minors. This is something that we're going to talk about quite a bit more later. The other thing within the bill is it defines library employees. And in its definition of library employees, it's not just talking about the board or the people who are actually getting paid and have titles and salary and all of that. It also includes volunteers. And it's not saying that volunteers are at some other level separate from library employees. It is defining library employees as both the people who are actually working for the library and the people who are volunteering. Sections 8 and 10 talk about liability and basically civil action that can happen against a library employee. And by putting volunteers in the same category as a library employee, you are essentially saying that a volunteer could be held just as liable as somebody whose actual job it is to be a librarian. Should something go haywire and under this bill, some rule was broken. So Section 8 would make the librarian themselves liable should material fall into the wrong hands. They would not be eligible for government or sovereign immunity. They themselves could be judged and prosecuted. That could include imprisonment. That could include fines. Section 10 offers the possibility of quote-unquote goodwill immunity, basically stating if this was a legitimate accident and everything was in place and they were following all the rules and just something accidentally happened, something slipped through the cracks, that there's this goodwill immunity. But that is incredibly subject to interpretation. So I'm incredibly concerned there because including volunteers to the same extent, I feel like that's going to turn a lot of people away from volunteering. Anyways, let's dive a little deeper. I do want to acknowledge that at some point in the bill, it does acknowledge the existence of the Miller test, not by name, but by spirit. So the Miller test basically states that rather than saying there was this one scene in this book that was horrendous and obscene. Say maybe the oral sex scene in Looking for Alaska. Rather than just pointing and saying, this page was inappropriate for children. The Miller test basically says, let's put this in context. As a whole, what is this work accomplishing? What is the purpose of this objectionable material within the context of the whole, rather than just the sum of its parts? I kind of talk about the Miller test, not by name, but in spirit in my video Scooby-Doo in Context before I knew what the Miller test was. However, I have a problem with section 1, subsection 6a, which kind of contradicts the acknowledgement of the Miller test. And really my issue with section 1, subsection 6a of HF 2309, it's twofold. So I'm going to read this directly. Subsection 6a defines presumptively harmful material. Means material that meets 2 or more of the following categories, and then it provides 7 categories. So key term here being 2 or more of these categories have to be met. Now when you say that more than one of these categories has to be met, that makes it sound like it's being thorough, like we're not just throwing it away just because it happens to have one of these things. If it falls into 2 of these categories, that's where it starts to get iffy. So in theory, sounds great until you actually look at the line items, until you actually look at those 7 categories. I was just having a conversation with my husband in particular about items A and G, or 1 and 7 if you go by numbers. Item A, the material is marketed, labeled, or rated by the publisher, distributor, or author as intended for adults, mature audiences, persons over 18 years of age, or a similar designation. Makes sense? That sounds like something that should fall into, maybe one of the categories of presumptively harmful to minors. But then we scan our way down to the 7th item, G. The material is shelved by the library in an adult section or is not categorized as juvenile or young adult material by the publisher. I don't know about you, but to me that reads like the same thing as item A. Like, it's not labeled as juvenile, it is labeled for adults. And here's the problem I have with that. Take this book. This is a book on photography. There are some pictures, and maybe some of the pictures could be considered inappropriate. There's no nudity, there's no inappropriate commentary. This is all about photography instruction and things to consider when you're taking pictures. We're looking at things like composition, at lighting, at equipment. This is not a book that is categorized as young adult or juvenile. This is something that a library would put into maybe an adult reference section, a hobby section. This would be rated as being adult level content by any given publisher. By the language in the bill, this is going to be categorized under the definition of presumptively harmful to minors. Again, this is not an inappropriate book. I have a book on bookbinding. Also, not going to be labeled as juvenile or young adult. Also going to be put into the adult section. Going to be an adult reference book. But bookbinding is harmful to minors. So that right there, we are essentially saying that anything that is not categorized already as being for children is by default going to be presumptively harmful to minors. So anyone under the age of 18 is going to have a hard time accessing this material. We'll talk about access here in a moment. Now, there are 5 other items, there are 5 other categories from B to F. And all of these, they make sense. They all have to do with sexual content, inappropriate, obscene, what have you. Things like obscene language, sexual acts, genitalia, masturbation. Also talks about things like sadomasochism and incest and assault. All of those kind of make sense. There's particular components of the way that they are phrased that concern me though. And that has to do with each of those 5 categories, those 5 remaining categories, starts with either the material contains or the material depicts. If we go back to our Miller test, the Miller test takes the work as a whole, not as the sum of its parts. But this bill has these categories based off of the sum of its parts, if it contains or depicts. So we have already kind of contradicted ourselves. And once again, on paper, it does make sense. On that note, Section 5 of the bill requires parental authorization for a minor to have access to this presumptively harmful material. So, in the existing environment, if I, as a parent, have a problem with my child checking out works by Oscar Wilde because, Oscar Wilde was a wild kind of guy, I can go up to the librarian and say, hey, can you make sure that my child doesn't check out any of Oscar Wilde's books? I feel like they're not ready for it. I don't know why we're picking on Oscar Wilde, but that was the first book that my hand touched. And the librarian can put a note on the account to say, don't let this child check out any books that are written by Oscar Wilde, or any books that contain this material or this kind of theme or what have you. And in doing so, I am not restricting anybody else's access to any of this material. I am simply stating, as a parent, I do not want my child to have access to it. Section 5 is going to require parental authorization for children to have access to this material. Meaning, rather than it being the default that anyone can access it, the default is that none of them can access it unless they have permission. I have multiple problems with this. First of all, do we not realize that children share things? All it takes is one child with a kind of cool parent to get permission to have access to this harmful material. They go in, they check out whatever, and then they share it with their friends. And then, those parents throw a fit and they're blaming the library when really it was my kid. This is one of the reasons why everyone should be glad I don't have kids, because my kid would be the troublemaker in that exact way. The bill does talk about how parents can authorize full access or restricted access. I'm really curious to know what restricted access would look like, because the next section talks about how things need to be categorized, but I don't know. I have a lot of questions. So we're going to require parental authorization to have access to this material. And this authorization is valid for 1 calendar year, unless it's revoked earlier. So that means every year, the parent has to go back into the library to provide ongoing authorization for their child to have access to this material. Again, as of right now, that is the default. If I am not cool with my child having access to Oscar Wilde, I can go in and say, don't let my child have this, and that will just stay on their account forever. Until they're old enough to say, you can take that off, I'm over 18 now and my mom can't tell me what to do. In theory, this sounds great, except for, first of all, libraries and librarians are not supposed to be the parent of your children. They are not there to protect your children. They are there to provide a public service. My personal philosophy, if you as a parent have problems with your child having access to certain materials, then it is your responsibility to put the restrictions in place. It should not be my responsibility as a parent to my hypothetical child to have to go in and say, remove the barriers. The other problem I have with this is this authorization is not just as simple as the librarian calling me at home and saying, hey, is it cool for your kid to have access to Fourth Wing? Which, despite popular belief, is not classified as a young adult book. I know a lot of readers classify it that way. It is thoroughly in the adult section. It does not get put into young adult. If it lands in young adult, it is by pure accident, not intentionally, not how it's supposed to be classified. We live in a day and age where there is a lot of data that is scraped from everyone for everything. Right now you're on YouTube and there is an algorithm that is working in the background that if you reach this point in the video, you have told YouTube you're interested in this kind of content, and it is working in the background to find other content that is similar to this, or at least that it thinks is similar to this, so that it can suggest it to you later. We see this everywhere. There is data being scraped everywhere with everything you engage with. Big Brother is always watching. So with that, I have a lot of concerns with requiring parental authorization. Not just in the sense of you can't just call the parent up and saying, hey, it's cool for the kid to have Fourth Wing. The parent has to go in and fill out an actual physical form, and that has to be kept on file. And this form includes things like the parent's name and their relationship to the child, has to have their signature, all of this stuff. It is a very formal, authorization form. Again, one of those things that sounds great on paper until it is used against a parent. We are labeling this adult content as presumptively harmful to minors. So at what point do we take it from just being this label that we're saying it's okay for a parent to give their child access to it, to saying the parents that gave their child access are problematic? When are we going to escalate it to the point of it being considered child endangerment? What is to stop this from escalating to a situation in which maybe there's a custody battle that somebody loses because they gave authorization for their child, and this was considered bad. We are collecting the information on the parents that are okay with this material. We are holding this on file. What is to stop it from being used against them? I have a multitude of dystopian series scattered throughout these bookshelves. There are much more horrific thoughts that come to mind with this that I am not vocalizing, partly because I do not wish to manifest these things and bring them out into the world, and partially because I know that if I speak them aloud, it is going to come across as paranoid until it actually starts to happen. And then I will be quietly sitting over here saying, I told you so. So I'm not speaking it. I'm not speaking that into the universe. But I think you get the gist. Let's kind of take some of the things that we've covered so far. We have an adult section that is material that is presumptively harmful to minors. We have the option of parental authorization. Within our adult section, there is a physical separation of this material from any other material in the library, and it is physically inaccessible to unauthorized individuals. So section 6 is where we start to get into those nitty-gritty pieces. We have 2 separate classifications that come to us in section 6. We have general access. This is the material that anyone, regardless of age, can access. This is your children's appropriate, family-friendly material. And then you have your presumptively harmful to minors classification. These are your 2 sections. So we have some details that I have questions on that I'm like, what logistically, how is this supposed to work? Like, we're supposed to document this classification and keep this documentation on file for 5 consecutive calendar years. What confuses me about this is if we're just holding this classification on hand for 5 consecutive years, what if the book is on the shelves for longer than that? That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. Seems to me like it would make more sense for the classification to be on file for as long as the book is on the shelf or in rotation. But what do I know? Or is it saying that this book has to be reviewed and reclassified every 5 years? Don't know. Doesn't make sense to me. The bill does specify that the presumptively harmful materials do still have to be accessible to anyone who is over the age of 18 or to minors who are authorized. I go back to my question of if we have restricted access rather than full access, and the presumptively harmful to minors material is held in a separate space that is inaccessible to anyone who is not authorized, how do you actually restrict the access? Logistically, how does that work? I also have a problem with this for the simple fact I live in a small town. We happen to have a library. The library is in the process of moving, but as of right now, the library in this town is very small. It is 1 room. It is a glorified hallway. There are 2 rows of books plus the books along the wall. There are also 2 doors, and both doors enter through the general area. The one door is up against this wall of bookshelves that if you go around to the other side is the children's section. So they've kind of made their own separate sections, and the children's area very clearly looks like a children's area. It's got the picture books, it's got the toys and the coloring books and what have you. It's got a very colorful flooring. It is like the area that children are going to be drawn to. And then you have the rest of the library. Explain to me how a small library like this is supposed to have this physical separation where this inappropriate, harmful, whatever material is inaccessible. Like, how are they supposed to physically keep that separate? Unless there's going to be major renovations. In which case, is there going to be like grants? Is there going to be funding for that? Like, how is that supposed to happen? But then the question also becomes, how are you going to maintain access for the individuals that should have authorization? There are a lot of people out there that look like children that are very much adult. There are some very young looking adults in the world. And I just have to question, how are we going to ensure that authorized individuals are still able to access this material? Do they have to present a photo ID every time they go into a library? Like, in theory, yeah, you put it on the library card. Maybe they scan the library card to enter the restricted area. Great, except people share each other's library cards. Like, what is to stop my child from giving their library card to a friend? So in order to ensure that anyone that is entering the area is of age, you're going to need photo ID. And I would say similarly so for anyone who is under the age of 18. You have to ensure that they are who they say that they are and that they're not just some other random kid that stole somebody else's library card, claiming to be Billy when they're actually Bobby. Logistically, how do you ensure that unauthorized individuals stay out of the restricted area while still ensuring that the folks that should be authorized, that should be able to access this material, are able to access it. Logistically, how does that work? At the same time, we not only have the legal restrictions at play, but we also have the social ones, because we are classifying these as general access and presumptively harmful to minor material. There is a lot of baggage that comes with calling this material presumptively harmful to minors, to have it be in some way, shape, or form restricted. I foresee a lot of people not wanting to jump through any of the hoops that are going to be put in place to ensure that they are authorized to access this material, first and foremost. So they're not going to engage in that restricted material. And I see a lot of people choosing not to engage in this restricted material because they don't want to be associated with the baggage that comes with presumptively harmful to minors. By having this separate classification, by having this physical separation, it is going to create the same social awkwardness that comes from entering the back of a Spencer's. This is where my brain starts to spiral, because you're going to have the social implications that come with it. You're going to have the logistical difficulties that come with this separation. Even though the bill states it's not intending it, it's going to happen. That is going to be the natural consequence of it. And so as we progress, we're going to see that the general access material is going to continue its normal flow. It's going to distribute as it normally would. But then this more restricted material that has this extra layer of security behind it, that has this extra baggage behind it, we're going to see that circulate less. And the thing with how libraries work, there is only so much physical space in a library. And when a book hasn't been checked out in a long time, it is going to be cut from circulation. That is just logistically how it works. Like, it has to. There are constantly new books coming in that are entering that distribution. And so whenever you're adding new books, you start to have to take some away. Otherwise, you're going to get whatever is happening behind me, which is fine for a personal bookshelf, not so fine in a public library space where things have to be kind of actually organized and logical so that people can find things. And so those materials that aren't being checked out are going to naturally be the things that get cut. And if we are adding these extra barriers and restrictions, as well as the social baggage, those materials, things like read this if you want to take great photographs, they're going to be in the restricted content, and they are not going to be checked out as much, and they are going to get cut first. And so as this material gets cut, less and less of this information is available. Again, this was not the written intention of the bill, but it is the consequence. And I cannot say for certain that this is an unintended consequence, because we have seen censorship in this capacity in the United States before, particularly, not exclusively, but particularly with Anthony Comstock. And it starts with trying to play the moral high ground and say, we are doing this to protect morality. We are doing this to protect the innocent. We are doing this to protect those who do not know how to protect themselves, the vulnerable. And it only continues to escalate from there until it's not just the obscene or the sexual material. It is then also the political commentary. It is then also the social commentary. It is then the things that expand the worldview beyond the norm. It starts with the things that will get the most people on board, because you don't want to be the person in the room that says, you know what, I actually want my 10-year-old to read smut. Nobody in the room is comfortable with saying that because nobody feels that way. But also, generally speaking, 10-year-olds are not out seeking smut. And this goes back to one of the larger sort of social issues I have with this bill. And that is, it is proposing a solution to a problem that does not exist. It is, I can't even say it's planting the seed, because the seed has already been planted. It is watering the garden of this myth that librarians are somehow these mustache twirling evil villains that are pushing some kind of agenda, that they are grooming our children, that they are pedophilic individuals who are getting gratification by introducing this inappropriate material to children, that they are brainwashing these children and they are trying to sexually exploit these children. And that is not what is legitimately happening. And if it is the very bare minority, not the norm. But the idea and the thought process behind this bill is suggesting that this is a problem that needs a resolution. And my biggest fear is if we allow this bill to be the resolution to the non-existent problem, what other problems are they going to try to solve? What other problems are out there that are just going to escalate into more and more restriction? Again, under the guise that it's not intended to restrict access for the folks that can handle it, the folks that are not vulnerable, those that are over the age of 18, those whose parents say it's okay. It starts with the moral high ground and then pushes and pushes and pushes. What we really need is parents need to be parents. Parents need to be the ones to say, this is okay for my child or this is not okay for my child. Parents need to be the ones that go in with their children to the library to help restrict that for them. It should not be the responsibility of the library or of the government to say, this material is generally not appropriate, and so we are going to hold this back. The library is intended to be an open for everybody space. And in an open for everybody space, there is going to be material that may not be suitable for all ages. And so it is up to the parents to decide how much freedom to give the kids. If the kids can go in there completely unsupervised and grab whatever they want, or if the kid needs to go in there with a trusted adult so that they can only pick out what is approved. And that should be on the parent. That should not be on the librarians, that should not be on the library, and that should not be on the government. The government should not be parenting your children. Believe me, I have many more thoughts on this bill, none of them positive. My first take of this video was 1 hour and 45 minutes. This one significantly shorter, and I'm thankful for it, and hopefully the audio quality is better. I don't know when this video is actually going to go up, if I'm going to get it up today, tomorrow, if the bill's already going to pass, or if the bill's already going to be defeated by the time this video goes up. I don't know. I am working a lot and I'm going to school. So when my videos actually go up is a constant question. Hence, it's probably been close to a year since my last one. But I feel like that's very on brand for me to just not drop anything for a very long time and then come back with my hottest of takes. But let me know your thoughts. But I do have ideas and I do have a project that I started working on years ago that I'm kind of bringing back that I'm hopeful I can actually see come to fruition. So hopefully there's more coming, not necessarily soon, but eventually. In the meantime, it is 11 o'clock at night. I have work tomorrow, so I'm gonna go. I hope you have a great day. Like this video if you liked it. Leave thoughts in the comments down below, and I'll see you next time. Bye! You're so far away, I can't do the hand thing on the camera, which is like a very 2016 thing to do, but I still do it anyway. Okay, bye.